Okay, thank you. So you get me again for this next session, everybody. And I'd like to welcome 3 new speakers who are going to talk to us about building digital competency and education. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Amanda Wachendorf, who is from Eagle Point. So the stage is yours, Amanda.
Hi, Claire. Thank you so much. And thank you for inviting me to speak today. I'm excited to talk with you more about leveraging education to ensure that organizations have a comprehensive digital competencies. So as we think about the concepts related to education today, I really want to talk a little bit about why education is important, because fundamentally, I do believe that you're here today because you believe in the importance of education. How do you share that with your leadership team, and why is it important? Then we want to talk a little bit about where to begin in relationship to your education strategy, and then closing with talking a little bit about how you close those skill gaps and making an education strategy stick with your organization. So why is it important? Why should you leverage education as part of your strategy related to digitalization? And it comes down to a few main concepts. The first one being recruiting and retaining top talent. You and I both know how challenging the marketplace is for talent right now. And as we consider the growth of the demand in work and the demand and keep retaining that top talent, this is an ever-present problem. As you think about your team members there across your organization, about 93% of millennials now believe that skill development and education is crucial to their career path and are expecting their employers to provide that to them. And these are individuals aged about 25 to 40 across your teams. This is a wide swath of team members that are expecting education as a part of their career growth. Also keep in mind that Forbes magazine is now estimating that about 1/3 of millennials plan to quit their career after the pandemic is over. So keeping this in mind is a very, very important concept of how do you retain your top talent. We also want to make sure that better leveraging the technologies you've spoken about. So today you talked a lot about cutting edge technology, making sure that organizations are operating at really the bleeding edge of where we're going in the industry. Making sure you're getting the most out of your tools is crucial. And then lastly, we of course want to increase efficiency, reduce rework, and increasing efficiency is priority one to making sure that those competing priorities for users' time are not infringing upon how projects are being delivered. So now that we've kind of set the stage as to why training is important, we want to talk a little bit about where we begin and where in relationship to that education strategy. Fundamentally, a lot of organizations want to begin with where are their users. I'm going to challenge you to begin with where is your organization. Having a comprehensive approach to training and education is foundational in understanding where's your organization today. So making sure that if your vision for your company is to be on the cutting edge, on the bleeding edge of where organizations are going, is your technology aligned there? And are you ready to invest in a strategic approach to education? Are you ready to invest time and energy and some funds? But it really comes down to, is your leadership engaged? Do you understand where your challenges are today? And are you ready to have a comprehensive approach to learning to meet those challenges? Secondarily, then you want to understand a little bit more about where your skills are. So knowing, are your skills of your users today in alignment with your clients' expectations, in alignment with your competitors or exceeding your competitors? And are you meeting the global marketplace and where skill levels are expected to be? And then lastly, where are your current losses? Are you having challenges with rework? Are you having challenges with errors going out the door? If those are where your challenges are in relationship to your skill level, you can take a more comprehensive approach to planning how you're going to educate your users. So again, that organizational readiness is key. And then funneling through understanding where your skill levels are today is going to help you to develop a strategic approach to how you train your users. So once you have that understanding of where your users are today in relationship to their skills and in relationship to where you would like them to be, where do you go from here? How do you help close those gaps? And the first piece is going to be closing those gaps through a blended educational opportunities for your users. So some users are going to really benefit from a hands-on learning experience. Others are going to benefit from e-learning. Others from webinars or potentially ask the expert type of events. Really encourage you to leverage a comprehensive approach to learning so that you're providing your users with a blended experience, allowing them to learn in a way that makes sense, and then reaffirming that information through a variety of different learning experiences. The next opportunity we'd like to encourage you to consider as you think about a strategy related to your learning is personalized learning. Everyone across your firm is going to have a different level of skill, and making sure that you're personalizing that learning in a way that allows users to learn to their individual skill gaps is going to increase the retention of that knowledge, as well as improve the engagement with your learning, because users are not spending time learning on things they already know and understand. As you think about that concept of personalization, though, I'd like to touch on the fact that automation here is key. You cannot build a custom learning path to every single one of your users. So making sure that you put some automation into place surrounding your learning strategy will help you to do this. Lastly, we want to offer users the opportunity to grow their skills. So insight into a career path so that they understand the skill level that is expected of them in order to grow into their future role will help also engage your users and help them to close their skill gaps. When there's transparency into expectations, users become more engaged with the learning strategy because they understand the value to them as an individual user. And then finally, as you think about closing the skill gaps for your users through an educational opportunity, this gives you as an organization the chance to create a skills matrix. This is really where we see firms going in relationship to transparency of their skills of the users, is they're doing so through building a skills matrix, understanding where their super users are, understanding where their areas of opportunity are for future training, and then leveraging that information for things like project assignment and things like allowing their users the opportunity to continue to grow their skills comprehensively. So as we think about making it stick, how do you make a learning strategy successful for your organization? I talked earlier about the concepts related to leadership engagement and leadership involvement and buy-in. That is key in relationship to things like messaging. So helping to make sure that your users understand from the top down that a learning strategy is vital to their success and your success as an organization. As you think about this, one of the key things to keep in mind in relationship to a learning strategy is keeping the why before the how. Why is this important before how do I consume my learning or what learning is assigned to me? And then lastly, making it fun. We want to make sure that users are engaged with learning content, of course, but we want to kind of make it fun, tap into that competitive side of users. We've seen a lot of success with things like leadership boards, things like badging or contests and prizes will help users to feel more engaged with their learning strategy and help them to get a little bit more out of it. You're going to get a little bit more engagement. So as you think about learning strategies, I touched really quickly on a broad swath of tips and tricks, and I want to make sure that I leave enough time for my cohorts to speak as well today. But the most valuable thing I want you to take away from our conversation is, in order to stay on the cutting edge, in order for you to continue to leverage some of the exciting opportunities that have been discussed today, foundationally, education is key to enabling all of that. So I just wanted to share those tips and ideas with your team today. And Claire, I'm going to pass it back over to you.
Thank you very much, Amanda. That's fantastic. So now we'll hand over to Pat Slattery from ArcDocs. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you, Claire. Just going to share my screen. That should be sharing now. Hopefully you can see my slides. So thanks, Claire, and hi everyone. So not giving my age away, but it's 43 years ago this month that I started my first job in architecture, and I then spent 30 years working for small, medium, large, Irish, UK, US architectural and multidisciplinary design practices, going from, I suppose, fairly junior level to a relatively senior level. And while my memory at this stage probably isn't what it used to be, I can honestly only recall a few occasions when any company organised and paid for me to attend training. For the most part, it was left up to individuals to sort it out for themselves with no management. Slide not changing. In the 13 years then since, through establishing our BIM consultancy and working with many different types of AEC companies, it's still my experience that there's a large cohort in the industry that doesn't value learning and training as it should, and unless it's required by legislation or regulation, for the most part, doesn't embrace or create an environment which encourages or nurtures a learning culture. I've heard many excuses for this, and the AEC industry is certainly not unique in this either, but at the same time, I do see a strong appetite for change among many people in the industry, and the lack of proper strategies for training leaves many feeling frustrated, perhaps even after significant investment in technology. There's also a growing desire and need to drive performance from BIM investment. And there's plenty of studies out there on this subject. One for IBM on the value of learning found 84% of employees in best performing organizations are receiving training they need, and compared with 16% in the worst performing companies. I mean, which one are you? For most organizations, their greatest asset is their workforce. And the study also found that new employees are 42% more likely to stay with a company if they're receiving the training they need. And conversely, employees who are not are 12 times more likely to consider leaving. And it's not learning for learning's sake, although all learning is good. There are significant potential gains from proper learning and training. It's essential to ensure that people working in organizations or working on projects have the necessary skills to perform their tasks efficiently in accordance with the standards and the information requirements. And the amount of training required is usually not massive, but it has to be appropriate and it has to be targeted at the individual roles. Developing a learning plan and developing a culture that embraces learning for a diverse range of roles is not something that happens overnight. Changing an established workplace culture is challenging. It must be approached in the correct way and needs people prepared to put effort into making this work. And BIM coordinators are an important part of this. There has been talk in some sessions today on building competency, so I just wanted to share a few pointers from my experience to think about when trying to do this. I mean, it's a lot of common sense, I suppose, but before starting, understand where you're starting from and where you want to get to and create a plan. What strategies or material already exist? Do you have to build from the ground up, or can you repurpose some existing plans? Examine each role to plan what you want each role to know. So establish a baseline level of knowledge and skills required for each role. Engage and ask people what they want to learn. They may not always know what they want, but most people engage better with learning if they believe it's something they need and want to learn. Ask what works best for them in terms of material, in terms of delivery method, in terms of timing, and so on. Develop personalized learning plans, as each person is different and has different needs. Start with the role and then look at the individual needs. Nobody wants to sit through training on subjects they already know back to front. Develop learning content through internal subject matter experts, or engage external sources to get the best and most interesting training material possible. The material has to engage those learning in a positive experience. Having dull, dry, or out-of-date material will turn people off. Provide easy access to the training material. So explore user-friendly learning management systems, provide a mix of structured and unstructured training, allow for some training to be completed where and when people need it through online or recorded sessions. Make learning a clearly defined core organizational value, and that's important, and let all employees know that it is supported by the organization's leadership. Emphasize the importance of training as a priority for all employees from day one. This should start at the recruitment stage. Letting candidates know about your learning culture can even make you more attractive as an employer. Make space for learning to happen. In our company, we set aside 20% of our employees' times for learning. It's not always easy, but it's encouraged and it's managed. Make sure employees know that taking time out of their schedule for learning is not only encouraged, but it's an essential part of their role. Develop the best training method to suit your requirements. A blended learning solution will probably work best with some formal training, e-learning, webinars, conferences, self-learning, etc. Those all contribute to a healthy learning experience. And don't be afraid of some trial and error before you find the right balance. Create bespoke learning material as well, specific to the organization's own way of working, using real project examples to make the learning experience less generic and more applicable to the individuals. Make it social, even make it fun. Gamification, quizzes, leaderboards can encourage and engage people in the training. Reward those who embrace training. Award points or badges to motivate and keep people learning in a fun way. Encourage all employees to share their own experiences and knowledge with others. Don't keep things to themselves. Provide a forum, possibly through an LMS, to allow employees to share their experiences and to ask questions of each other. And also keep it fresh. Regularly post new material and let people know what's added. It's really important that organization leaders lead by example. So including leadership in the learning program reinforces the learning culture and encourages others as well. Encourage feedback to ensure the training is meeting the needs of the team, and react and respond to the input and let people know that their voices are being heard and appreciated. And remember, don't be afraid to adapt the training if parts of it are not working. So constantly review and update the material, disregard irrelevant or out-of-date material. Nobody wants to go through something and find it's old. No one can or needs to do all the learning at once. So set milestones for everybody and then measure their progress as they develop. And continually monitor, measure, report on the training. Most organizations don't currently measure productivity, I don't think. So finding metrics to measure improvements in productivity from now can be difficult, but try to set some KPIs to track going forward. And finally, I would say, don't forget to think about the future in your training plans. Let's not forget that the future's already started now with things such as robotics, drones, self-driving machines, wearables, AI, machine learning, etc., just to mention a few. So the rewards for getting this right can be quite significant. If you don't get it right, then I suppose you're risking a lot of things. So that's it. Thank you for listening. And I'll hand back to Claire and any questions that people have.
Brilliant. Thank you, Pat. Thanks so much. Before we get to questions, I will hand over to our final speaker, who is Vaughan Harris from Exceptional BIM. Over to you, Vaughan.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Yep.
Good evening. I would say from sunny Mauritius, but we are in full moon, so I always say keep the best till last. Thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed those last two sessions, and I think what is great is, Manda, you spoke about the why, and Pat, you also spoke about what I saw, the impact and the change of planning, the steps to training. I want to approach this from a completely different angle. I want to speak about the digital competency that's missing. When I talk about that, I think first just a bit of a background. As you can see me, there's my BIM bazooka. I think many of you know me. I'm outspoken as the Baron of BIM with my strong opinions and my ceaseless energy to bring Africa into this BIM arena. And after listening to today's sessions, I can definitely say that I'm not alone. And I speak mostly on behalf of many developing countries, in particular Africa, where I think we have now this unrivaled opportunity to learn, or not just even cherry pick, from these valuable lessons that we've actually learned today. And even from other global instruction heroes, unsung heroes, I could call them, that we have this inspiration to keep firing this BIM bazooka, as I like to call it. And I think listening after to Paul Doughty today, I think he stole my BIM rockets. Thanks, Paul. This recent merger with Exceptional BIM and Remerge Mauritius, I think it's allowed us in particular to expand on education, try to help prepare an industry for a better understanding between what we look at as education and the digital built environment. And I think since founding the Exceptional BIM platform, I've learned that BIM learning in particular is more than just a cognitive process. And I'll take quickly 8 minutes to explain why. If those individuals listening who have discovered these benefits of digital transformation and have now seen this never-ending learning opportunity or improvement to self-educate themselves and continuing to develop their own greater mastery. And it's not just the technology training. I think we're missing the factor of good leadership skills and soft skills. and promoting those values that the technology has given us to almost reinvent ourselves. But there's always a but. This, I think, is a considerable challenge. We need to break down these smaller pieces, and this is a quest to all those training with organizations out. We need to break and dissect and tackle each sector and how we unlock this improved digital transformation and enable, let's say, construction to thrive, both within a traditional as well as an advancing medium. And remember, I think formal education gives us the basic principles to walk. And if we want to keep moving forward, we've now been given the skills to understand how to run or sprint. And to learn how to run, you need to self-educate yourself. And I keep harping on this self-education. And I think this whole lockdown and this pandemic has taught us this, that regardless of what you see BIM as, BIM to digital engineering or even digital construction, VDC, whatever you want to call it, it means we have to start thinking about the value it offers others. This old way of working in the traditional way of working doesn't work anymore. And this pandemic, I think, has given us all a second chance to reinvent ourselves, not reset or restart. We have the skills, we have an access to infinite amounts of technology. The reality is that I think we're living in one of the greatest times to be alive. And this is where we get to reinvent what we do as professionals. If you're only doing this, let's say this, adjacency industry professions require. Imagine, let's say we had a project team without any formal titles or identities and allowing each person, let's say, to take on multiple roles and levels of responsibility within a project. Call it an open mind project environment, where the tasks that you tackle are done as a team, not by a discipline. Okay, dream on. I don't think that's going to happen in any time in the near future. But wouldn't it be fabulous if we had this dynamic, competent workplace that ultimately, let's say, had the success of a company that relied heavily on its human resources strategy? I think that's the education that we need to start focusing on, is what is our human resource strategy? The question I could pose is, so how do we maximize then this entitlement attitude that takes advantage of the experience that we already have within our industry? And I think the other big challenge we do face is that most companies have a problem retaining their soft skills, those experts that work for them. And unfortunately, most of us, by tradition, are drawn by the path of entitlement or even a role or an identity within an organization. And I think you can all agree that the difference between qualifications today and experience, I think, is getting even more stark. And our rookie colleagues that have recently graduated are joining a workforce that we've seen qualified jobs that never existed before. And most of our experienced hands on the fields are looking at maybe even a future that they don't even recognize, where they've been changed by automation, this digitization, and we're now seeing globalization. And we just cannot simply ignore the fact that human intelligence needs to come before we continue to dive into this real exciting, streamlined world of AI. I think it is Paul Doughty who explained it in his BIM 2 Next Generation. This BIM thing, I think, has taught us that we have values, but we haven't yet led to put them in place. I see it as this digital competency as almost as an off-road challenge. And I think learning to speak and influence all your ideas or visions need down your lips if you don't, or you're not able to influence others and learn from others. I think education, as we're seeing it, is one of the most important aspects, regardless of your age or your career in your life. And I guess it's about seeing what I like to call is the glass that is half full and ignoring the half of the glass that's empty. I think one thing education has taught us, especially about lockdown, is the ability to see the emptiness of the half a glass while choosing to focus on the fullness of other glasses. This pandemic in particular has definitely given us lots of half-empty things to see or think about. However, the surge of technology can be defined by the ability to see half full opportunities. So someone has to ask me very quickly, what is the important characteristic of the digital competency? I would say it's digital vision, project personality. I know plenty of BIM managers who think they are visionaires, who have that technical expertise, but it takes more than that. We need leadership qualities. We need soft skills within our industry. When I say project personality, I mean it's the traditional definition. It's about creating a team or project energy, and about having that charisma or that underlying belief that someone understands you and understands your vision. And I think of the word BIM education, I see one thing: just be exceptional. And that's our motto. Great leaders around the world that are surrounded by, let's say, also this overwhelming forces of traditionalism in our industry, and these critics, or the dragons, as I've heard today, that are continuing us to push us away from this infinite game that we are challenging. The other is looking at, the question I'll raise is, does the technical experts we have on projects shape the way we think as an industry? I think we all know that a second language is like a second soul. And I would go as far as to say is that to have a deep understanding of BIM within our built environment is an opportunity for us to have the ability to speak a digital language that will help us together craft this digital as well as this physical reality. Try to imagine yourself as your BIM, being the Neo in the BIM matrix. And I think it takes grit if you want to be exceptional in this fast advancing industry. And that is constructive courage. And in closing, I just want to say, whatever happens, all that information that we're absorbing today and in the future that's to come with technology and learning, let it be, even if it's a positive or a negative one, it will affect your future. And the information you need will fill your mind and shape your future within our built environment. And if the only thing you do take in is history, then I think we all know what your future is going to be. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So 3 really, really interesting talks there, and I think I'm very impassioned by what you all had to say. And I think we'll kick off the conversation. First of all, just to say to listeners that, or participant delegates, that there is a poll, so please fill that out and give us your feedback on that. That'd be great. Now, to kick into with the questions, many people would see training as a chore, something you know you should do, but really you don't want to do. How do you engage people in learning in a way that makes learning fun? And I guess, Amanda, you can take that one because you spoke about fun in your presentation.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think foundationally, we all have competing priorities for where we spend our time. Project work and administrative work and learning often falls to the lowest of those priorities. So keeping the learning fun is key to making sure that users are engaged. And one of the key ways we see organizations doing that is through things like leaderboards or competitions. It's amazing the level of competitiveness your users have and your team members probably have that you don't even know about. And as soon as they start seeing themselves fall down in that leaderboard and they're not in the top of the pack anymore, all of a sudden you'll see their learning start ticking back up again. So creating that sense of competition has really been successful for a lot of organizations.
Yeah, brilliant. That's a really good point. Vaughan, can I just ask you to stop sharing your content? Would that be okay, please? Yeah, thank you. Another question here. So how do we encourage staff to take ownership of their training instead of waiting to be trained by their employer? And I guess, Vaughan, this is what you were talking about as well in your presentation. You're on mute. Could you just unmute yourself? Thank you.
There we go. I think it blends into the first question, where I like the fact that the whole of Exceptional BIM is built on the back end of a game design mechanism in a non-gaming text. And it's designed to motivate learners in participation and boost this engagement. And this is, I think, lends to your question too. You know, we have this environment where unfortunately people are forced to take training, and all training that exists needs to start looking at how do we simulate the aspirations or the visions of experience of working within a traditional environment And we need to understand how do we train to translate that into this digital BIM environment in the advance of real project aspirations. And I think that's what training is missing. It's too rigid. We need to break away and expose the alternative BIM usage, as we've seen in all the sessions today.
Oh, great, thank you. So I have a question here from the chat. I'm working in Hong Kong and see a lot of guys that are BIM certified and having tons of certification on completion on BIM related courses. But I observe that some of them could not even contribute or deliver properly on actual projects. And this is a topic very close to my heart actually as well. So what do you think that the training centre organisation or people are lacking? So it's almost like you have people that can do the technology, but they don't understand the industry. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, how do you find that balance? And Pat, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, it is something we were very aware of when we became an authorised training centre. And we deliberately set up that all of our trainers were also working on projects. So everybody is a project, BIM coordinator in our practice, and they will spend some or part of their time also training other people. What you described there was exactly my experience when I went on a first Revit course, was that the trainer was a good trainer, probably. He understood how to teach what was in the book. But once you went beyond what was on the page, he had no idea. Once you tried to put it into a real world environment, he had no idea how to take it there. So we're very conscious of that. And I think that's really important, that the people who are training need to also have practical experience of doing the job as well.
Yeah, so not just the kind of people receiving the training, understanding the industry, but also the trainers understanding the industry, so they can give those real life examples, real life
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So when questions get asked about how a certain part of the training applies to a practical part of their day-to-day job, that we can speak from an experiential point of view, that we've done this, we've experienced that on projects, and this is how we approached it, or this is how it should be approached on a project.
Yeah, great, thank you. Okay, so another question here is, we are talking about upskilling the existing workforce, but what are we doing to push academia to provide BIM ready skilled graduates? So kind of moving it, I guess, out of the workplace and into academia. So what are we doing there? I know in Ireland, we've got great courses around BIM and BIM related topics. The rest of the world, can Vaughan and Amanda give us an example of what's happening on your side, parts of the world?
I might go first, but not the best answer. I think, unfortunately, in developing countries, and I speak in particular of Africa, our education facilities as well as the institutions are actually preparing our students for failure. The actual programs or the curriculums are not in line with the new digital way of working. And we're seeing a lot of students coming out, these rookies out of university, and they're expected just to slot into these jobs where you see the advancement of technology and they haven't learned anything. It is certainly a challenge within most African countries. And I think, unfortunately, it's been left to the individual, which is why I said in my talk that self-learning is the only way you're going to teach yourself to run or sprint, especially when you've now been given the legs to learn how to walk. It's all about self-learning. We can't sit in classroom environments. I think this pandemic has taught us that. So I think it's a bit of a conundrum for many developing countries where we see this challenge that they're not being taught within the institutions or even the associations.
And interesting, I just flipped back to a question from the, I think it was, what time are we at? Oh no, it's actually in this session from Nigeria. So a delegate from Nigeria is saying, what are you doing to bridge the BIM gap in Africa? It's a real challenge. And I think if it stems from, as the basic need of education, I mean, that's probably one of the answers to that question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, in the 2 years we launched Exceptional BIM, we had over, I think, 1.5 million learning hours. And the majority of the learners came from Nigeria, Uganda, and Kenya. Mm-hmm. And it was just so inspiring to see the eagerness to learn and understand what the industry is all about without having to chase after a a formal education. So I think the eagerness is there. The carrot has been dangled, and there are those that are taking advantage of that constructive courage, that I call it.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. And so, Amanda, this one I think is good for you. Or do you believe people should be rewarded financially for upskilling and taking on all these additional BIM tasks and roles? In my experience, employees are expected to be exceptional without receiving the exceptional salary.
Yeah, that's a challenge for sure. I think fundamentally the financial compensation for having exceptional skills and exceptional knowledge base for many users and many organizations comes in an advancement of roles. As you continue to move up and within the organization, as you continue to advance in roles. So fundamentally, we haven't seen a lot of organizations leveraging financial compensation for training. Depending on the compensation scale as well, sometimes it can diminish the value of training. If you're offering a very small, compensation for completing a training, sometimes that diminishes how a user will value the training versus, creating that inclusive culture surrounding training that Pat talked about. Making sure that your organization fundamentally values continuing education is key. I think that's really where we see most firms becoming successful.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Pat, that you quoted IBM, because I mean, as Pat knows, I worked in IBM prior to my role I'm in now for like 19 years, and IBM would have Think 40, which was where you spent 40 hours a year learning. And you fill out, an online thing, and it was expected that employees would do this learning. There's a huge amount of value put on it. And in fact, one of your KPIs was, have you completed your 40 hours of learning? So it wasn't like they weren't paying you to do that, but they were giving you those 40 hours to go and learn something that was relevant to your role. And you could get, some form of certificate at the end of it if you did a certified course, or you could attend a conference. But as long as you were learning, and that was the value they put on it. So it wasn't a financial reward, but they were giving you that time to do that. So it's an interesting.
I agree wholeheartedly with that. Yeah, I mean, one of the questions there about how do we get people to take ownership of their own learning, and I think one of the things a company can do, even if they don't organize the training for people, is to provide the space and the time for people to do their own learning. Because from my experience, too many people are expected to do all this learning in their own time, and the companies don't make the time available to people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's like, outside of this industry who are lifelong learners. So every now and then they will do a course and they will pay for it themselves and be happy to do that. It's just a different industries have a different mindset as well about this. Yeah.
Well, I think it's a mix. You've got to find the blend, and everybody will do a bit of self-learning. Companies should organize some learning for people. So it's all about finding the right balance. And every individual is different as well. Some individuals need to be spoon-fed, I suppose, a little bit more, where there are other people have a lot more motivation to go out and learn themselves. So you've got to identify those people within your organization, those who are willing to just go off and do it themselves and don't want to be provided with any training. They will learn it themselves, and others who will just sit back and do nothing unless you give them a kick or a push to do it.
Yeah, I think I'd like to add to that. What you were saying is that it's not just Africa, but I think unfortunately the construction industry in general is fragmented at every level, and it starts with the client and it ends with the institutions as well as the academia. And I think it's very important that government bodies as well as the institutions need to become more closer with these new tools and stop allowing just the software vendors to push call it the BIM wash, if you want to call it that. But we need to start preparing students as well as our professionals for these advancing technologies, and it needs to start with our academia.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's as well, Amanda, it comes down to like, what is the main cause of resistance? Like, can you pinpoint? Sometimes there's often resistance to training, both at a company in terms of learning. Sorry.
No problem, Claire. You broke up a little bit, but I believe the question was, what is the main cause of resistance to training at both an organizational and personal level? Okay. You know, I think organizationally, one of the big causes of resistance is just time and money, right? It's that competing priority of keeping people 100% billable or you know, greater than that sometimes as you think about the completion of project work and the push to continue to be as productive as possible. And many times that competing priority for efficiency and for project work overtakes the fundamental need to upskill and train and support your users. And so that's why earlier I briefly mentioned, you know, it's all about where organizations want to pay. You know, do you want to pay for training up front and support and train and upskill your users and keep them and grow your talent? Or are you willing to pay for that on the back end in the loss of talent, the loss of project work, the loss of productivity, and potentially the loss of clients if you're having poor project work? So that's generally the resistance we see at an organizational level. So speaking to leadership in a way that resonates with them is important. You know, laying out concepts related to employee turnover and loss of revenue will help drive that messaging. And their commitment to learning. When we think about it from a user perspective, though, most of the time the resistance we see comes from the fact that they're really being driven to be 100% billable. They're really hearing that messaging from their management that they have to get project work done and they should be billable 90 or 100% of the time. So when that messaging changes at the top, the resistance with users starts to lower and go down, because at the end of the day, most users that we encounter want to be successful in their career. And so if that messaging to be successful involves training, you'll see fewer resistance to training.
Oh, thank you. Very good.
I think also the real broken shift, as Mando was saying, comes when central governments as well as influential agencies don't put their foot down and prescribe a adoption of digitalization as a catalyst for positive change. Because if there's no positive change, why should I learn?
I think that's where education needs to start. I think people at that level in government, whatever, don't understand enough about what's needed. So I think, you know, we need to target those people with education as well, not just people who are in the actual AEC industry.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Amanda, just a quick one specifically for you. Could you tell us a little bit more about automation of learning to personalize it?
Yeah, perfect. So the automation of learning to personalize is something that, you know, Eagle Point feels really passionately about, but how we're seeing firms do this is through a fundamental skills assessment, either pre-hire or annually or in whatever iteration makes sense for your organization, but a skills assessment, not a survey. So this isn't how I feel I am as a user in leveraging technology. It's, do I understand the technologies that I'm using? And do I understand how my firm wants me to be using that? It's an actual assessment. Once that assessment's completed, doing the automated mapping to personalized e-learning will help to expedite the learning for users. So taking a course that's traditionally 4 or 6 hours long and paring that back to an hour and a half based on my skills gaps tells me as a user a couple of things. One, it tells me where my skills gaps are, because none of us know what we don't know, right? I don't know where my individual gaps are until I'm assessed. And two, it engages me in my learning because I'm not spending time learning things I already know and understand. So building in the automation and the mapping there is crucial, because organizations can't have a single BIM manager or learning coordinator sitting and building structured learning for individual users. It's just not efficient or effective. So doing that through an automated mapping with an assessment is really going to be crucial to helping organizations personalize learning at scale.
No, that's fantastic, and there's loads of questions and we're completely out of time. I'm so sorry if I didn't get to your question, but Amanda, there was a question in the chat as well around how do you then manage that? Who manages that going forward? Which in a small company is really difficult when, you know, somebody has to take that on as an additional job. So that's something else for companies to think about. So basically that was absolutely fantastic. And just in terms of like the summary, Amanda, you were talking about talent and organizational readiness and skill levels and making it fun. And Pat, you were talking about setting out a plan and a strategy and KPIs to track all of this and thinking about the future. And Vaughan, you were thinking about, you know, self-educate, I think is your big message here. Self-educate, get the universities on board as well, and to maximise the entitlement attitude and to be in the digital competency and how we move that forward. And I guess I'm 1 minute over, huge apologies, but thank you so much for a very engaging session. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Claire.
Thank
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you everyone for that great session.